thank you so much for praying. I love having a praying church, and I love this time that we have together. We're going to go ahead and sing a couple songs real quick, though, before we get into the Bible. So if you want to grab your hymnals, hymn 553, hymn number 553, Nearer My God to Thee. Hymn 553. Sing the first, second, and last verse of this song. You guys can all stand. You can get your wiggles out. You guys can all stand up. 553, Nearer My God to Thee. Nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee, even though it be a cross that raiseth me, still all my song shall be nearer, my God, to Thee. Nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee. On the second, though like the wanderer, the sun gone down, darkness be over me, my rest a stone. Yet in my dreams I'd be nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee. Last verse. Or if on joyful wing, leaving the sky, sun, moon, and stars forgot, upward I fly. Still all my song shall be nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee. Turn over a few pages to hymn 640. 640, we're going to sing Sweet Hour of Prayer. Sweet Hour of Prayer. We're going to sing both verses, two verses of this song. Hymn 640. Hymn 640, first and second verse of this song. Let's lift it together. Sweet Hour of Prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, that calls me from a world of care and bids me at my Father's throne make all my wants and wishes known. In seasons of distress and grief, my soul has often found relief and oft escaped the tempter's snare by Thy return. Sweet hour of prayer. On the second, sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, Thy wings shall my petition bear. To Him whose truth and faithfulness engage the waiting soul to bless. And since He bids me seek His face, believe His word, and trust His grace, I'll cast on Him my every care and wait for Thee, sweet hour of prayer. Beautiful. beautiful song. You all can be seated. Thank you for singing out tonight. Now, next week when we lose our Awana workers, you got to sing twice as loud because we're going to lose about half our crowd. So make sure you're ready for that next week. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 25. Looking forward to tonight's study. Every time I get into 1 Samuel, I love narratives, and I love just how God works and demonstrates his work through the lives of David and so many others in the book of 1 Samuel. So 1 Samuel chapter 25 tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about advice. In a way, advice might be too specific. But as I was thinking about advice, I Googled advice. And it's fun. When you Google things, it's amazing what you get. So I want to give you some advice I found on Google. If you want your favorite song to become your least favorite song, then just make it your alarm tune. That's actually good advice. That's good advice. Don't wash your floors with cough syrup. That's solid advice. Don't kick porcupines with bare feet. Good. Don't sled down hills with interstates at the bottom. That's good advice, kids. Listen to that. That's good. Sell at most one of your kidneys. Yeah, okay, it's sinking in a little bit. Yeah, okay. Sell at most only one of your kidneys. Don't lie down in a cattle pen. That's a good one. Don't test the strength of your skull with a nail gun. Fair. Don't lick dry ice. Yeah. If you didn't know that one, that's good. Don't pour salt in your eyes. That's good. Your body has the correct number of holes in it. Don't make any more. That's good. Don't microwave yourself. I don't know who's tried that. Let's see here. And if you're on a ball field and someone shouts heads up, don't actually raise your head up. So that's good. This is some solid advice. Some of it's actually decent advice, It's amazing. Everybody has advice. Everybody's got their own bits of advice. And it's amazing. I've learned a lot of wonderful things from all sorts of different people, from all sorts of different walks of life, from all different ages. You can learn something from just about anyone. But while everyone has advice, not necessarily all advice is actually good advice, right? I mean, half of those bits of advice I read were, okay, practical, should be obvious, and then some of those were just dumb. They're just dumb bits of advice, right? When you care about someone and you see them upset, you see them about to ruin their life, you want to be able to give them good advice. And so this evening, we're going to talk about the importance of giving good advice the right way for the right reasons. And so I've entitled this evening's message, The Power of the Right Advice at the Right Time. The right advice at the right time. In chapter 24, we saw David and Saul had a major breakthrough in their relationship. David had a chance to kill him. He just cuts off a corner of his robe. As Saul leaves the cave where David and his men were hiding, he shows him, hey, I could have killed you, but God convicted me, and I'm not going to touch the Lord's anointed. We talked all about that a couple of weeks ago. And this didn't mean, however, that even though, Saul basically apologized and repented and said, hey, I'm sorry, you've been more righteous than me. You're right. That's wonderful. But while Saul somewhat apologized, it didn't mean things were back to normal. David and his men were still on the run, and if anything, they were just kind of in limbo, waiting for Saul to blow up again. But for the moment, there was some semblance of peace. But then we come to 1 Samuel chapter 25. Look at verse 1 with me. We're going to look at this verse real quick and then get into the rest of our text. It says in verse 1, and Samuel died. And all the Israelites were gathered together and lamented him and buried him in the house of Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. For as significant as Samuel was, that is a really short, blurb about Samuel. Oh, by the way, Samuel died, they buried him, and everybody came and mourned, and then David moved on. But it is integral to what's going on. We haven't seen much of Samuel since he really, rebuked Saul and then anointed David and all that. He's kind of taken a back seat in the story. But this spiritual leader in Israel, he's gone. One of the most influential leaders Israel had to this point in their history is now deceased. The entire nation, the Bible says, comes together. David and his men even come to be there to mourn. It's a sad day in Israel. So as they're there in Ramah, they're going to travel down to the wilderness of Paran, okay? which is way down south. But on their journey, they're going to stop off at a place called Carmel. Okay, so they're heading south from Ramah. They're going to hit Carmel, and they're going to hang out there for a second. And that's where we pick up our story. So it says in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 2, "And there was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel." These are like sister cities, like Nixa and Ozark, okay? So Carmel and Maon are right next to each other. So he lived in Maon, but he had a bunch of livestock, we're going to see, in Carmel, okay? "And the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, the name of his wife Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. But the man, Nabal, was churlish." That's a good word. "The man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. And David heard in the wilderness that Nabal did shear his sheep, and David sent out 10 young men, and David said unto the young men, Get you up to Carmel, go to Nabal, and greet him with my name. And thus shall ye say unto him that liveth in prosperity, Peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. And now I have heard that thou hast shearers. Now thy sheep which were with us, we hurt them not. Neither was there aught missing unto them, all the while they were in Carmel. Ask thy young men, and they will show thee. Wherefore let the young men find favor in thine eyes, for we come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, whatsoever cometh to thine hand unto thy servants and to thy son David. And when David's young men came, they spake to Nabal according to all those words in the name of David, and ceased." We're going to pick up our reading in a moment. Let's kind of catch up to where we are. So David is about to meet one of the rudest men in all of Israel. It's a great story. It's a sad story, but it's a good story to learn from. So there's a man, the Bible says, named Nabal and his wife Abigail, and he was very wealthy. Now, the Bible tells us he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. That's a lot to me. If you are a sheep and goat farmer, that's probably not a lot. Now, here's the thing, though. That wasn't all of Nabal's wealth. That was just a portion of his wealth. And back then, they also didn't have, like, the equipment that we have to shear sheep and to maintain livestock. So they're, like, shearing sheep by hand. So this is a big deal. So when David and his men come to Carmel, as they're passing through from Ramah down to Paran, they come to Carmel, they see these men, they're shearing sheep, they just start talking to them. They're like, hey, these guys are friendly. I mean, we are in Israel after all. This is kind of our homeland. These guys are cool. So we see what they ended up doing as we kind of continue our reading, that David and his men basically would camp with these shepherds on their journey. And they just basically, what they would do is they would set up camp and surround them and their sheep, offering them protection, because, hey, they were basically mercenaries, traveling soldiers, so they were always going to have a guard out at night. And so, like, hey, we'll do you a favor. You guys can just camp with us tonight. We'll protect you. Everything's cool. And then what David does is he sends a couple of his men, his messengers, up to Nabal, because when it says that Nabal was shearing his sheep, he wasn't doing that. He was the rich dude back at home. You know, he's got his men, his shepherds shearing the sheep. So he sends his men over there to Moan to meet with Nabal and to say, hey, we are servants of David, and we have been with your men in the fields, protecting them, and you can ask them. He basically says right there, you can ask your young men. We have been nothing but kind to them. And so we would just wanted to know, you being a wealthy man, if you would be willing to give us a meal, if you'd be willing to just take care of us. Now, in our Western society, if you did that to anybody in this room, we'd be like, what is wrong with you? I mean, think about it this way. If somebody came into my backyard and set up a tent and stayed there overnight and then knocks on my window the next morning and says, hey, I stayed outside last night. I was keeping you safe. Can I have some Pop-Tarts? I'm like, get out of here. What do you do? I didn't invite you here. You're a trespasser. Why are you bothering me, right? In our Western society, like, I'm calling the cops for trespassing. But in that culture, it was very common. They were a much more hospitable culture. In that culture, they were actually obligated by law in some parts to take in strangers and to feed them. Now, we would love that. I would just go to your houses, because some of y'all are good cooks. I'd just be showing up at 5 o'clock, like, hey, what's for dinner, you know? And so this was a common act of hospitality. Now, it's a little more extreme because David's got like 600 men traveling with him, so it's kind of a bigger deal. But Nabal was wealthy. he could handle it. He had a lot of livestock. He could slaughter a couple of them. It wasn't going to be a thing. And so in that culture, especially David doing his part of hospitality, of providing shelter and safety, not shelter, but safety and protection for the shepherds, and by being good companions of them, not stealing from them, as a lot of other mercenaries would do in their position, but taking care of these shepherds. He says, hey, I did my duty of being a hospitable neighbor by taking care of your shepherds. And so I was wondering if you would do your duty as a hospitable neighbor in our culture and just give us a little bit of food, give us a little bit of money, whatever, and we'll be on our way on as we continue our journey. So it was kind of like Airbnbs were backwards back then, you know, like people would pay you to stay with them, you know, instead of you paying other people to stay at their house, you know. And so it was a very common, normal thing in their culture. But look at what Nabal does. So the messengers go, they relay the message, verse 10. And Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? And who is this son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shears and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? So David's young men turned their way and went again and came and told him all these sayings. And David said unto his men, gird ye on every man his sword. And they girded on every man his sword, and David also girded on his sword, and there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode by the stuff. Okay, things are escalating quickly, all right? It would have been culturally appropriate for Nabal to give them anything. He literally could have just said, here's some stale bread, go. It would have been rude for him to say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. That would have been rude, to even just say, I'm sorry, I can't help you, okay? Which I do all the time to homeless people. You know, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I'm filling up my car with gas. I barely have enough money for that, you know? And so, but he took it another step further when he says, who's David? I've never heard of him. I've never heard of this son of Jesse. Now, he knew exactly who David was. David was a huge deal in Israel. David was the champion who slayed Goliath as a teenage boy. David had become the king's son-in-law. David had become a mighty military commander. David's reputation preceded him. Everybody knew and loved David. So when this man says, I don't know a David, he's doing that on purpose. He's intentionally disrespecting David and his name. You know, it'd be like, you know, the president of the United States walking through the doors and be like, I don't know Joe Biden. Who's that? You know, I don't know that guy. It's disrespectful, you know. And I'm not trying to drudge up I'm not trying to like cause any problems here, but it's kind of like when Biden was elected and there was like this phrase going around, not my president. Why were people saying that? Well, it was a slight, you know. I didn't vote for that. I didn't choose you. So he's doing the same thing to David. He's like, I don't know any David. Never crossed my path. And then he takes it a step further. Look what he says in the second half of the verse. In verse 10, there be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. He's throwing shade at him. He's like, yeah, there's a lot of guys out there who betray and backstab their master. You know what he's bringing up? He's basically talking about him and Saul. He doesn't know the whole story. He doesn't know that Saul has literally been trying to take David's life. All he knows is David and Saul aren't in speaking terms, so he's going to jump to some conclusions and say, hey, I've heard of guys that abandoned their master, kind of unreliable, backstabbers, betrayers, traitors. And so not only does he say, I don't know this David, he clearly knows him, and he starts just like trashing him to his servants. Very disrespectful, especially in that culture. And then he says, why would I give my bread and my water and this meat that I have prepared for my shepherds, my shears, and give it to strangers when I don't even know where they're from? So this guy's just being rude, flat out rude. So the young men come back to David and they say, hey, this is what he did, this is what he said, kind of disrespectful. There's a lot of ways you could respond to that. But again, you've got to understand the cultural significance of this is lost, I think, on us, that this is a really, really, really rude thing to do. I mean, it would basically be the equivalent of going into a restaurant where you expect to be served and they say, we don't serve your kind here. I mean, it's basically what's happening here. Because again, in that culture, it was just expected. You go to someone's home, they're going to take care of you one way or the other. It might not be great, you know, it might be like a McDonald's experience, but they're still going to take care of you, right? And so for him to say, I don't know a David, I'm not giving you my food. It was, we don't serve your kind here. So David is just furious. And he tells his men in verse 13, gird you every man his sword, and David goes and grabs his sword. He takes 400 of his mercenaries and leaves 200 behind with their stuff to take on this rich man and his shepherds. This is overkill. This is not good. But David is furious to be disrespected this way. And hey, I get it. It's annoying to be disrespected. It's annoying and it hurts to be ignored. It's frustrating. I don't like it. I've had experiences like that. I really value good customer service. And so, when you go to a restaurant, you never get a refill. It's like, come on, how hard is it? I'm over here dying. My mouth's the Sahara Desert, Now, granted, I drink like 6 cups of whatever I have when I drink a lot when I'm, at a restaurant. Non-alcoholic. I drink a lot of like water and sweet tea. Now, when I'm with Tony, though, no, I'm just kidding. No, I don't. So like when you get disrespected, it's you kind of get angry, You get a little frustrated. Like, I can't believe that person would cut me off. I can't believe they would ignore me. I can't believe they would treat me like that. Don't they know who I am? I even had that experience at our bank, and I've had this a couple times with the tellers at our bank, that I went there and I was trying to get pennies for the penny offering. And the lady's like, oh, we can only do 1 box of pennies. I was like, well, no, I know you have more than 1 box of pennies. I was like, and I have a lot of money here, and I have an account with you. I would like several boxes of pennies. Like, a box of pennies is like $25 worth of pennies for VBS. Like, no, we can't do that. It's only for businesses. I was like, oh, well, I'm with Victory Baptist Church. Yeah, well, your name's not on the account. So, don't you know who I am? I'm just like furious, And I literally left angry. And I was just like, and then later in the day, I'm like, why was I so mad? But it hurts to get disrespected. It's frustrating, And so this is how David's feeling, but he kind of takes it a step further. He's like, guys, get your swords. Now listen, I don't know exactly what was on his mind in this moment, but when you're heated and you let the ball start rolling, things escalate quickly. And all of a sudden you're starting to feed into those emotions. Well, skip down to verse 21. Now David had said in verse 21, kind of rehashing something that happened earlier, like before he kind of gets to this point. Now David had said, surely in vain have I kept all that this fellow hath in the wilderness, so that nothing was missing of all that pertained unto him. And he hath requited me evil for good. So and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave of all that pertain to him by the morning light any that pisseth against the wall. Those are angry words. He's literally saying, this guy disrespected me. I'm going to his house, and I'm going to kill every man in his home before the morning light. David, calm down, sir. He's angry. He's in the moment. He's heated. He's disrespected. Don't you know who I am? I don't know what's going on. I mean, David, again, he hasn't slept well probably in a while. They're on the run. He's frustrated, but he is really taking it out on Nabal in this disrespect. But what happened back up in verse 14 is one of the young men, one of the shepherds, sees what's happening and about to unfold, and he says, I have got to do something. So look there at verse 14. It says, but one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he railed on them. But the men were very good unto us, and we were not hurt, neither missed we anything as long as we were conversant with them when we were in the fields. They were a wall unto us, both by night and day, all the while we were with them, keeping the sheep. So he's like, they were great. They helped us. They were good men. Verse 17, now therefore know and consider what thou wilt do. For evil is determined against our master and against all his household, for he is such a son of Belial that a man cannot speak unto him. Again, strong words, but even this servant recognizes, as he's speaking to Abigail, Nabal's wife, our master's wicked. He's a jerk. He's rude. He's inconsiderate. His Bible says he was such a man of Belial. I mean, again, those are strong words. When you go back to the beginning and it says that he was a churlish man, to be churlish means hard, severe, stubborn, difficult, cruel. We know churlish people, don't we? It's a good word. Churlish people. They're stubborn. They're hard. They are just the worst. They're severe. Everything's extreme with them. They're always angry. They're ready to blow up at a moment's notice. That was Nabal. And even here the servant says he was a man of Belial. When did we hear that before? Earlier in our study, who else was called a man of Belial? The sons of, Eli. Thank you. Hophni and Phinehas were sons of Belial, wicked, wicked men. And then, yes, Samuel's own sons become wicked men. What that means is you're the seed of Satan. It's not a very endearing term. These are lost people. These are wicked, wicked men. And it says, of his own master, we know he's the son of Belial. And I love how he says it here, and that a man cannot speak to him. He's not even worth talking to because he's not going to hear you. He's not going to respond well. It's just a waste of time. He's like, Abigail, you know, you've been married to this man, you know. But here's something interesting about Abigail. What did the Bible say about her back in verse 3? It says, now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. She was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. She was wise and pretty. How does a guy like Nabal end up with a girl like Abigail? It doesn't make sense. It happens all the time, though. It happens all the time. So here's Abigail. The servant's like, I can't go to Nabal. Can't talk to him. We need your help. You got to step in or else we're dead men. So look at her response. And in her response, as we read through this, it's going to teach us some great wisdom when it comes to diffusing difficult situations and offering advice to people who are about to do something really dumb. So look with me, if you would, at verse 18. It says, then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep ready dressed, and 5 measures of parched corn, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on asses. And she said unto her servants, go on before me. Behold, I come unto you. But she told not her husband Nabal. And it was so, as she rode on the ass, that she came down by the covert of the hill. And behold, David and his men came down against her, and she met them. Verse 21 and 22 is when David says, I'm going to kill these guys. Verse 23, and when Abigail saw David, she hasted and lighted off the ass and fell before David on her face and bowed herself to the ground. Right away, we see a couple interesting things that Abigail does. The first thing is this. Abigail sought to make things better with a gesture of generosity. Right away, she's coming with gifts in hand. She says, hey, I'm here to bring you what my husband should have given you long before. And so she comes bearing this like donkeys full of meat and barley and bread and all this stuff, all this wonderful feast just comes rolling up to him. And here's the reality. You shouldn't try to buy people off, okay? Husbands, I'm speaking to mature married men here for the most part. We all know, like, you make your wife angry, you don't get to just come home with flowers and magic reset button, everything's okay. Like, I wish it was that easy. We all know it's not that easy. So young guys who are married, it's not that easy, okay? You can't just come in with a gift and be like, everything's better, okay? But that's a great first step. To be able to come in, especially if it's something thoughtful. I mean, in this situation, Abigail says, hey, what were they asking for in the first place? Food. Let's bring them food then. Let's give them what they wanted. And let's come in and let's try to make them a little bit at ease to see, hey, we have nothing but goodwill in mind for you. And that's whenever you're dealing with a difficult situation or you're trying to diffuse a situation that's really blown up or you're trying to help somebody out, it always helps to come in with a kind gesture. Maybe leave them a nice note. You don't have to blow a bunch of money on them, but you just do something thoughtful. You do something intentional for them, and that starts to immediately diffuse the tension in the air. The next thing that she does, as soon as she rides up, the Bible says she jumped off her donkey and fell straight on her face and bowed down to him. She showed, the second thing that we see here is she demonstrated great respect towards David. What had just happened? David had been grossly disrespected. David wasn't the king, but he was still a very influential and important man. And her husband disrespected him, so she goes the opposite extreme. She bows down to him. Now listen, she overdid it. David was not the king yet. He was just a guy, an influential guy, a powerful guy, but he was just a guy. And so her bowing down to him was kind of overdoing the level of respect, saying, listen, I respect you. My husband may not have, but I respect you. I understand who you are. Whenever you're trying to diffuse a situation, whenever you're trying to intervene with someone or give them advice, you've got to bring respect back in the room. You've got to be the one to show respect. And it doesn't matter how they treated you. It doesn't matter if they disrespected you. David was on his way with sword in hand to kill her husband, and she showed respect to him. Think about that. And that's an example given to us for a reason, because this helped diffuse the situation. And we live in a world where respect is not a thing anymore. So when you show respect to someone, especially someone who just mistreated you, or someone who's angry, and someone who's really mad, or someone who made a big mistake, and you show respect to them, that's going to really catch people by surprise. Like, whoa, where did that come from? Because we don't live in a world where people in our world expect to be insulted. People in our world expect you, if you're coming at them, that you want to fight. They don't expect respect. So if you're trying to diffuse a situation, start with a kind gesture, and then be the one to introduce respect. But don't, and this goes with everything, don't introduce these principles and these concepts expecting them to be immediately reciprocated. Because you might bring respect into this tense situation, and you get cussed out in return. Been there. You might be the one to show respect to somebody, and they're still mad at you, and they're still fuming. But you need to be the one to show respect and be willing to humble yourself a little bit like Hannah did. Let's keep reading and see what else she does here. Look at verse 24. And she fell at his feet and said, "Upon me, my Lord, upon me let this iniquity be, and let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak in thine audience and hear the words of thine handmaid." The third thing she does is she takes all the blame. Was it Abigail's fault? I keep saying Hannah. Was it Abigail's fault? No, it wasn't Abigail's fault. Abigail had done nothing wrong. But she said, "Upon me place the guilt. Let me bear this burden. Let me be the one that is held responsible for the actions of my husband." Now, she's married to him, so she kind of can take this. But at the same time, it wasn't her fault. And to be fair, she's in a bad marriage. If Nabal treats strangers like this, you know he doesn't treat his wife much better, especially back then. In that culture, women were property. So for her to stand up and say, "Hey, I'll take the fall. Let me respect you. Let me bring you gifts," she's really going out of her way, because she could have just stepped back and said, "Have at it." Think about that. Think about that for a second. She could have just said, "Yeah, go ahead. My husband's right over there. Take him out." Some of you in this room right now, you're like, "Yeah, I would do that." We're not that bad. Come on, no. See, she literally gets in the way and says, no. Here's my kind gesture. Here's my respect. And place the blame squarely on me. Be willing to take the blame to diffuse bad situations. This one stinks because it is incredibly unnatural. The natural response is always self-defense, especially for me, and I've been there a million times. I don't like to be wrong. I don't like to admit guilt. I don't like to admit that I messed up. So my immediate response is deflection or defense. I'm going to defend myself. It's very unnatural to just immediately say, "I messed up. I broke it. I did it." My immediate response is always to make up an excuse. Abigail doesn't make excuses. Abigail doesn't blame someone else. Abigail owns up and says, "Place the blame squarely on me." We have to be the one that's willing to take the loss. If we're going to diffuse a situation and see healing and be able to offer influence and counsel, we've got to be willing to take a loss. Because think about it, when people are fighting and in conflict or upset, it's usually because they don't want to admit they were wrong. So you need to be the one to start, again, without expectation of reciprocation, by going in and saying, "Hey, you know what? I actually messed up. I failed." This is marriage advice. This is family advice. This is work relation advice. Any relationship you have, if you can start this way, by kind gesture, respect, accepting guilt and blame, you're well on your way to diffusing a really hostile, dangerous, upsetting situation. You can't expect the other person to have the right response every time, but you should be willing to admit guilt when necessary. Look at the fourth thing Abigail does in verse 25. "Let not, my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, thine handmaid, saw not the young men of my Lord, whom thou didst send. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, and from avenging thyself with thine own hand, now let thine enemies and they that seek evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now this blessing which thine handmaid hath brought unto my Lord, let it even be given unto the young men that followed my Lord. I pray thee, forgive the trespass of thine handmaid, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord fighteth the battles of the Lord. So when she says my Lord, notice it's lowercase. She's talking to David, again, with respect. But then she says, because he's fighting the battles of the Lord, capital L-O-R-D, the evil hath not been found in thee all thy days. Yet a man is risen to pursue thee and to seek thy soul. But the soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord thy God and the souls of thine enemies. Them shall he sling out as out of the middle of a sling. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he hath spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel, that this shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord, either that thou hast shed blood causeless, or that my Lord hath avenged himself. But when the Lord shall have dealt well with my Lord, then remember thine handmaid. So after she kind of sets the table here, by offering a kind gesture, by reintroducing respect, and then by taking the blame on herself and saying, hey, blame me. I'm sorry. I should have intervened sooner. I should have helped sooner. Then she gives David some really thoughtful, intentional advice. What she ultimately does here is she brings things back into perspective for David. She says, David, you're the anointed next king of Israel. You are clearly blessed by God. Consider everything that you've done and that God's helped you do. That's what she's saying in these words. She's saying, listen, she's praying for forgiveness. I pray thee, forgive the trespass of thine handmaid, verse 28. For the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house. She's like, God's gonna, your future is secure as long as you just keep following God. She's showing him right here. She's like, everything's under control because God's on your side. But I love kind of how she kind of brings it into perspective here in verse 31. That this shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord. Whenever you're finally king, you're going to look back on this moment and you're going to be like, it wasn't that big of a deal. It's amazing, though, when we're in the middle of a situation and we're mad and we're angry, like the teller disrespects you, and you're angry. It's funny when you step away from the scene, you kind of realize quickly, it wasn't that big of a deal. I really blew that out of proportion, didn't I? And that's what Abigail's trying to do here for David. She's trying to bring things back into perspective, trying to help him realize it's not that big of a deal. God's got you. God's going to bless you. God has great things in store for you. But then she closes her speech by saying, when the Lord shall have dealt well with my Lord, when all of his promises have come to fruition, then remember thine handmaid. And those are significant words. We'll talk more about those next week. We'll finish this out next week. But look at what David says in verse 32. And David said to Abigail, this is the guy who just said, I'm going to kill every man in this house. This is the guy who just said, everybody get your sword. We're going to Maon. We're going to kill us some men. Look at what he says in verse 32. David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me. And blessed be thy advice. And blessed be thou, which hast kept me this day from coming to shed blood and from avenging myself with mine own hand. I wish I had more time to go into more of this, but what just happened when we talked a couple weeks ago? David was convicted about avenging himself with Saul. And he came out and said, I can't touch you. I can't do this thing. And then a little bit of time passes. He gets mad at Nabal and he says, I'm going to wipe this dude out. Abigail intervenes and says, come back to your senses, brother. And he says, thank you. Blessed be you. Blessed be thou of God for intervening. Blessed be thou of God for having a cool head. Blessed be thou of God for saying the right words and for keeping me from trying to avenge myself. Thank you for your good advice. Now listen, I wish we could follow this pattern and every single conflict would be resolved immediately. This worked so well because both were spiritual people. Abigail, being sensitive to God, was able to give good advice. David, being sensitive to God, was able to receive the advice. We'll talk more about that next week. But there's these principles that we can take with us and understand that if we can have this humility of Abigail, that humility to give a gift, even though David was coming to kill her husband, and to be respectful to him, even though he was ready to, had sword drawn, that she had well thought out advice, that she was very intentional about it, and that she was also appropriate and timely in how she approached things. See, Abigail knew who she was. She was Nabal's wife. She had every right to intervene. One thing about offering advice and intervening in troubled situation is, especially as a pastor, I'm going to be really honest, really candid, I want to just step in and intervene in like every situation. I see things happening, and I'm like, oh, man, I know where this is headed. Seen this before. I want to help fix this. I want to solve this problem. But you know what I don't want to be? I don't want to be that guy who just butts into everybody's life, because that doesn't help anybody. Just inserting myself unnecessarily. But there are plenty of us in this room that God has us in different relationships and different situations for a reason, because he wants you to be the person to help diffuse a bad, unhealthy situation. He wants you to be the one to provide healing in the home. He wants you to be the one in your workplace to restore joy. He wants you to be the one in the church to put out that little fire because you're close to it. We don't need to be jumping to every little conflagration, every little issue, and inserting ourselves. But we need to have wisdom like Abigail did. Hey, I'm in the middle of this. It's time to step up. It's time to intervene. It's time to try to make a difference. And she used some very godly principles to approach David and to diffuse the situation. But she understood her position. She understood who she was. She wasn't going to unnecessarily insert herself in somebody else's business. But when God opened a door for her to intervene, she came ready with godly advice in a godly manner. I don't know what's going on in everybody's lives. I don't know what family dynamics are like. I don't know what work dynamics like. I know how life is. You might have fought with your wife and your husband on the way out the door to church tonight, right? Let's take these biblical principles of diffusing conflict and offering advice, helpful advice, doing it this biblical, godly way. And if we can do that, you never know. Not everybody's going to respond appropriately, but you never know whose life you might help and touch by following this example of giving godly advice. All right? Let's close in prayer, and we'll be dismissed this evening. Father, thank you so much for the time.